Thanks so much for being here this morning. We don't discount that you guys have enough to do, but we're really excited to bring this program to you. As you know, RPC has been working to be the collective voice for commercial real estate in primarily downtown Portland focus. So we have some really exciting data to show you today, a lot of survey collection, and some really great work went into this. So I'm going to allow Julia to take over. After the panel discussion, we will do a quick RPC update and present to the group here some of our internal mapping that we've been doing downtown and some of our data collection as well, so that everyone here can see what Revitalize Portland is working on. Without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Julia Winkler. Thanks so much.
Good morning. Downtown Portland office vacancy tops 27%, rising from prior quarter. Portland rates high on lender list of concerns in 2023. Downtown hotels go up for auction. Portland falls 53 places from number 3 in 2017 to number 56 out of 80 in the Urban Land Institute 2023 Emerging Real Estate Trends Report on overall city real estate prospects. These are just a sample of recent Portland Business Journal headlines that highlight the saliency of the topics that we're here to discuss today. I'm Julia Winkler. I'm delighted to be with you this morning for what I expect to be an informative and insightful conversation about critical issues facing our city, the impact that our perceived business climate, state and local tax regime, and permitting process have on our economic trajectory. This is an exciting conversation for Revitalize Portland Coalition, not only because of its relevancy, but also because it's the first time that RPC is talking about these issues. And the second Issues Symposium of the organization following September's symposium on homelessness. I think that all of us, both on the stage today, in the room, and frankly the city, share a common goal. And that goal is to see Portland succeed. See it be a thriving city that works for all of its residents. From small business owners in downtown Portland whose livelihoods depend on activity in our CBD, to the employee base of larger corporations that make meaningful contributions to our economy, to the children that are being raised here, and to the members of our community who are unfortunately forced to live in the margins. I'm thrilled to be joined by the panelists with deep subject matter expertise who can not only share their perspective on these topics, but help us unpack the various nuance and layers that led Portland to its current state. We are joined this morning by Kayla Wardenberg, Senior Vice President of Brokerage at JLL, Chris Robinson, Senior Counsel at CRK Law Group, Patrick Gilligan, Executive Vice President of Lincoln Property Companies West, and Jerry Johnson, Principal of Johnson Economics. Each panelist will spend several minutes talking about a specific part of the issues, and then we'll follow each panelist presentation with a Q&A that includes some pre-submitted audience Q questions. And with that, Kayla, do you want to begin by sharing your insight on downtown Portland business climate in 2023 leasing prospects?
Good morning, everyone. All right, so last year, JLL made a decision in summer of 2022 that you really couldn't talk real estate without talking politics and talking about the state of downtown. So we had the Business Journal conduct a survey of business leaders in the Portland metro area, and we're going to share some of those findings this morning. All right, next slide. So research was conducted in July of last year, so I'll just put a caveat that this was pre-election. But the responses that we got were from a really broad section of the business community. So we had over 200 respondents. We got the businesses that are 0 to 50. We got the businesses that are 5,000 plus. So we really felt like we had a great cross-section of who is in the business community, what they think about the Portland Metro. Next slide. All right, first question was assessment of the business climate. I think, I'll caveat, a lot of these things I think we feel, but we really wanted to quantify these numbers and what people's sentiment was. So the overall assessment of the current business climate was overwhelmingly negative. Over 60% said the business climate here was unfriendly. The positive thing is we asked people, what do you think it's going to be a year from now? And really respondents were overwhelmingly optimistic. They thought it will get better. Next slide. Okay, so we asked a question about business taxes and how friendly taxes are to the business community. And again, 63% anti-business. There were only 3% of respondents that said pro-business. Everyone else was neutral. Next slide. This was a little bit of the gut punch slide, in our opinion. We asked people, are you thinking as an executive about moving your company out of Portland? And you'll see that over a third said yes, they are considering that. The responses were varied. Taxes was the highest singular response, but what I'll point out is that if you combined safety, crime, and homelessness into one singular issue, that will be the highest response. Next slide. Okay, now we asked people what you would rank. What's your highest concern? And again, looking at the rank number 1 or number 2 is very telling. Number 1 or 2, homelessness and affordable housing as a concern, 60% ranked that number 1 or number 2. Crime and safety, that was 53% of people's number 1 or number 2 response. Unaccountable political leadership was a close third. Next slide. So we asked people what top priorities were to turn around the state of downtown, and you'll see 98% said the top priority that they would rank was a reduction in crime and homelessness downtown. Next slide. So I'll pause here because the business journals, they do this all over the nation. And they said, we never see 98% of people agree. 98% of people agree on nothing in this entire nation, especially in very divided times. 98% of people in Portland agreed that the city has not addressed the issue of homelessness and a reduction in crime. 98% of people. The 2% we said were asleep at their keyboard. Next slide. Okay, I just wanted to go briefly into market impacts. Julia obviously already referenced things that we know about the state of downtown. So this is our vacancy projection for the urban core. Our research spends a lot of time on this. We have a team of 3 here that picks through the data. So what we studied was obviously what we've seen in negative absorption already, so people leaving space, and then people that we know are on the market for less, people that we know are in the market looking at a suburban market instead of being in downtown. And you'll see a near term where that vacancy not only crests the high 20s, but could go to 30%. Next slide. On the positive side, what we would say about the users that are staying in the urban core, and just in general in the market, they might be right-sizing, but they're going to high-quality space. So what you're seeing is a concentration of the relocations going into what we would consider Class A or trophy product. So they're saying, I can take less space, but I'm going to go into the nicest space in town, the highest amenities, the best parking. These are the considerations that people have for a relocation in the urban core. Next slide. Okay, so I think we've all heard the announcements, probably people heard about Liberty Mutual. This is our tracker on all of the significant moves out of the urban core post-COVID. So there are 7 tenants over 25,000 square feet that have moved from the urban core to the suburbs. And you'll see that represents about over 500K of that negative net absorption. Next slide. Okay, urban and suburban vacancy. So what we wanted to show was basically urban and suburban vacancy were tracking each other very closely. They might be a different percentage, but in terms of the lines, they're moving along in a similar pattern in 2019 and 2020. And then what you're seeing is the spread. So as you get into 2021 and 2022, that gap is widening. So you're seeing the suburbs outperform the urban core, which I think everyone would expect with this data. Okay, so our key takeaways. Many business leaders are unhappy with the tax homelessness policy that's going on in downtown, and they're making decisions based on that unhappiness. People speak with their feet. The other thing we studied in this was what are businesses doing to address this. So people have put amenities in their space. 50% of the businesses that responded said that they had agreed to pay for parking for their employees, which was a key thing post-COVID. So there are considered efforts being made by certain businesses to get people back into their space. The third is that tax and homelessness have led to major vacates from the urban core to the suburbs, and you are now seeing that in the data. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks very much, Kayla. A lot of material for us to discuss in Q&A. So I'm very excited for Jerry's presentation. RPC recently commissioned a study that Jerry completed on our permitting process here in Portland.
Sure. I'm going to try to stand up too so I can see the slides. As the economic side of this, I'm just happy to not be the bad news person since you brought it. I think I was saying before that I think the bad news is still understated. I was telling my class at PSU that if they're admitting to 25% vacancy, it's probably worse than that. It's just not good. So what we did as a piece on permitting, which I know this is sort of a tangential issue to this broader piece, how is the city that works working? We took a look at permitting trends, which are not going to be surprising, the findings of this study in the city of Portland, as well as the cities of Hillsborough, Beaverton, Gresham, and Vancouver, Washington. Take a look at how permitting trends are going. So I go to the next one. So these are our jurisdictions. It's been helpful to have up there. I would have remembered when we also threw in Gresham. So take a look at the population growth rates, and you see where things are growing. Happy Valley, by far, is the fastest growing jurisdiction. We bring this up because when things are growing quickly and we have rapid changes relative to the base, you expect service levels to be challenged for a period of time. City of Portland obviously is not challenged by rapid population growth relative to the other sample set. Next one. So rent growth and multifamily units, again, this is one of the big issues. You hear all the talk at the state level. We want more housing production. The city of Portland wants more housing production. An important aspect if you're trying to actually develop housing, obviously, is your permitting times and the cost associated with that, and can I actually do it? So we have seen rents go up dramatically. They're starting to come back a little bit. But largely it's a supply-demand issue. We always say whenever the vacancy rate's below 5%, rents go up above the rate of inflation. Whenever it's higher than 5%, they tend to go down. It's been a very tight market. We have a housing production problem, which has been systemic. But what we have seen in downtown Portland, and some of this is related to some of the things that were brought up about the office market, is a drop of amenity value for downtown. So if we take a look at the rents, we start seeing a divergence where the urban product hasn't seen any meaningful escalation in pricing for the last 6 years, whereas the suburban product, and actually in absolute value, has actually finally topped the city of Portland product for downtown core product. It's not per square foot because they've got relatively larger units, but they're actually higher rents. So the suburban product's done really well. Downtown is, but this becomes this sort of virtuous investment cycle when it goes well. It's a disinvestment cycle when it goes down. When we don't have office employees downtown, they don't support the amenity base, they don't make it feel safe with additional people that are sort of the non-houseless people. And then it makes it less attractive for the residential side as well. So they get this negative disinvestment cycle. I think that's what Portland's fighting with right now. Next slide. Sorry, I go way off target all the time, but that's what I do. So look at the Portland issues. Portland went through a huge permit surge, which This is an absolute magnitude, so keep in mind it's not a per capita. Portland obviously is much larger than these other jurisdictions. There's a point in time everyone wanted to develop in Portland. The urban product was the big thing. Developers are like lemmings. They all sort of go in the same direction until they don't. And so everybody was coming downtown. That was the hot thing to do. One of the reasons we haven't seen a lot of escalation in the urban market is the fact that they built so many apartments. So we have vacancy above 5%, which makes it hard to get rent growth. Next one. Let's see. There it is. So what we looked at is annual permit issuance over time. And I think people might be surprised. Portland, of course, is the worst, which isn't surprising, but it isn't as worse by as much as you might expect, for at least from the anecdotal evidence you hear. But if you take a look against Portland, Hillsborough, and Beaverton, which are the three larger ones that have a fairly consistent level of permitting activity, you see Portland bouncing around a bit, but average number of days permitting issuance isn't that bad. One of the issues we ran into with this data, we ran all their permits that we could find over the last 10 years, is it does include the design review process, which Portland has a very broad design review, which really adds a lot of time. And it adds a lot of qualitative, not quantitative, because it's very unpredictable, because it's aesthetics. And it also, the smart neighborhood groups have figured out it's a great way to kill development during the design review process. And they've also learned that there's a time value of money, and if they can drag things out, they can kill it. The next slide. So average permit issuance turnaround time. Again, these are the same jurisdictions. You see Portland starting to extend themselves. Gresham went way up for 1 year, but that's because they had two public-private partnership. Keep in mind, Gresham is really hard to use as a case because it has very few multifamily permits. We focused on multifamily because of single family, a little bit different. They had a couple difficult ones, but it's a small jurisdiction, didn't mean much. We didn't put as much weight on the Gresham because it was really two projects that was slowing this thing down. But basically, Portland, largely, it just takes longer to permit once you even get through design review. Next. So average permit turnaround, Portland, again, distinguishing itself. And this doesn't surprise anyone. I mean, people have seen this forever, right? Portland takes a long time. We've actually tried to work with the Bureau of Development Services. They try, but they've got a really weird funding system that they try to do it in real time. You know, it's a service provider. They should be providing the service. It should be something reliable, but it isn't, because they cut funding just before the surges happen every time, and then they have less staff. By the time they staff up, their permits have dropped off, so they miss the cycle on a consistent basis. A lot of this is related to the structure of the government. There's a lot of ways to get into it, but the findings of the study are not surprising. Permit times are higher in Portland. And I don't know if we had another one or not. I think that was about it, yeah. So this is a bunch of stuff that's too much text I shouldn't put in a slide. But basically, we're 72% above the sample set. Portland is slow, getting slower, and we're just really not providing the service levels. This is just one of a small piece of the myriad of issues that we have in Portland that we're talking about this thing, so I don't want to dwell on it too long. But that was the results of our analysis, so I'll drop it at that. Thanks.
Thanks very much, Jerry. Another thing that I think is interesting, and we'll get more into this, but what I've observed in speaking with people who have been active in the Portland real estate market for the last decade or 2 decades is that they almost uniformly say that the system, the permitting process 10 years ago was more efficient and effective than it is today.
Yeah, well, it's not surprising. I mean, the trend is basically longer. So, I mean, the trend's fairly consistent, at least in Portland. The other cities seem to be tightening it up.
Yeah. I think it'll also be interesting, we'll get into this, to talk about how Portland might compare to other cities in the country. And with that, Chris, your practice focuses on real property tax appeal and consulting. Can you share with us what trends you're seeing with respect to property tax?
Sure. I thought there was a band. Yeah, more good news. We are, our firm's practice is solely devoted to property tax valuation issues, and we have been actively involved on the office product for a variety of reasons. You know, our valuation date is January 1 each year. So we got a lot of calls in 2020 after, March of 2020 because of the pandemic, and we want to appeal our value. And I had to explain to them that the value date is January 1 of 2020, and the pandemic was not here, so the next opportunity is 2021. And we have filed appeals on a number of properties, both office and other product types. 2022 more or less doubled the number of appeals that we have filed. This is not about pension funds, rich people. The occupancy of office buildings in downtown Portland is an economic engine for all the other small businesses, and so they're feeling the impact of the vacancy factors. And I think the vacancy factors are actually understated a bit. When you really look at the shadow vacancy, the sublet space, reported to be 2.5 million square feet of sublet space out there on the market. And if you have direct vacancy in your building, you have to compete with that. And frequently those rents are discounted. So the interesting thing with Measure 50 and Measure 5 is your property taxes don't directly reflect what's going on in the marketplace, because your taxes are based on assessed value, not market value. And so why would what would be the opportunity to appeal? Well, there's a concept or a function called compression. And what that means is that you pay the property tax based on the lower Measure 5 tax rate, which is based on market value, versus the Measure 50 tax rate on assessed value. And so it is important when you look at your tax statement to look at the real market value. Real market value still really matters, because the vast majority of our appeals right now are compression appeals, because we will get the market value reduced to a level that will require the assessor to recalculate the tax based on the Measure 5 tax rate. And this can result in significant savings. Another thing that I've noticed is the property taxes, despite the protections of Measure 50, for many commercial properties over the past 5 years have increased around 30%. That is despite the 3% cap on assessed value. One of the reasons for that is you have the 3% bump in assessed value, but because of bond measures that are not subject to Measure 5 or Measure 50 protections, the bond measures have increased the tax rate. So despite, you might have a decline in the market, your property taxes are actually increasing. So it's kind of counterintuitive. So I guess what I would say is when you get your tax statement, you really need to study it. You don't just look at the assessed value. You look at the market value and say, well, if I were to sell this property today, what would I likely receive? And this just doesn't affect the tax rates. You have property taxes, and then you have all the layering of other taxes that have been passed. So it makes the cost of doing business pretty challenging in Portland. And that's why you are seeing some migration, because executives, companies are looking at their bottom line, and they're going, well, Cruise Woods has become a popular destination. Tax rates are lower. We don't have all the other taxes on top of property taxes. So it is a real concern. You know, a friend of mine, David Margulis, had Margulis Jewelers on a corner of in the Jackson Tower. Been there for decades, and he gave up. You know, I think he was just tired of the challenges, and because of the problems in downtown Portland, you know, kind of drew his client base. Just said, I don't want to come down and deal with this, and he had to hire security just to be at the front door. So there is a lot of pessimism. I think it's important that you also recognize that there are opportunities, and it's people in this room that can help make a difference. Portland has incredible potential. I've been here all my life. I see what it's capable of, and it's going to take time. It really is going to take time, and we have to hold people's feet to the fire. So, thank you.
Thanks very much, Chris. And Pat, can you share some of your thoughts on the impact of our tax regime on our economic trajectory? I know you have many of them.
I do. I have a lot of opinions on things. So I work at Lincoln Property Company. We're a national developer. I know most of you know that. But I cover 4 states within our country, so Oregon, Washington, Idaho, and Utah. So, traveling throughout those markets every week. And then I also have the privilege of talking to all our other market partners across the country who are basically in every major metro area, right? And also in Western Europe. And we compare notes, right? And I kept my teeth in San Francisco, so I saw a lot of, the early signs, I think, of, the intersection, right, of politics and real estate and business in that market. And so I have strong opinions on it, just because I get to see sort of outside of our, myopic lens here and just see, hey, what's going on in other cities. And I react differently when I sort of get told narratives like, oh, well, this is a COVID thing. Well, no, it's not, because there's a lot of cities that are, living their best lives right now. Austin, Texas, Nashville, et cetera. Markets that have, experienced this big boom. Boise, Idaho. I'm in Boise almost every week, and it's amazing what's happened there. Salt Lake City, right? Amazing growth, amazing in-migration. And that is a lot of, people leaving the West Coast and going to these more sort of markets because of all various reasons. And a lot of that's lifestyle and business, right? That's where they want to be. They want to raise their kids. Livability's better. It's a business-friendly environment. And these states are sort of really embracing it because they see this exodus coming from the West. And they're there with open arms because it's a boom for them, right? And so when I sort of go through kind of just how I feel about what we're doing here, it's really just from a place of competition, right? I just look at that. That's a great equalizer, right? You're only as good as our other markets. And if we're not paying attention to that, we're going to lose, right? And we're at that, I think, that moment in time, right? I like to be an optimist, but I try to be more of a pragmatist in the sense that, I want to look at the data and the facts and use that to drive decisions. And, again, I think we have a few slides up that we actually stole from the Willamette Week. I was very lazy in my slide presentation, so. There we go. Again, just looking at some of our peer set of different cities, right, that you got up there. There you go. So population change, right? So for the first time, I forget in how many years, Multnomah County actually experienced a population decline, right? So that's the first kind of red flag. The most substantial one is our tax base. That's your personal income tax if you're a high earner in the city of Portland, there is actually one city that's higher, that's New York, or state, excuse me, and that's if you make over $25 million a year, you get hit with I think it's 15%, so we aren't that bad. But obviously this hits everyone at a much lower threshold. And to me, that's that's where I sort of look at the most. I'm like, California is bad enough, but at least what California has done right is they don't allow counties to tax more than the state, right? Oregon, that's totally broken. And that's why I really think this is a fix that just can't come from Portland. It can't come from our county. It's got to come from the state, because they do have the opportunity to try to balance this out. But the fact that you can be 14.7% in Multnomah County, right, and all of a sudden you say, hey, I'm going to go anywhere else in the state and pay 9.9% outside of, outside of Metro, right, where you do have the Here Together tax, which is still a fraction of this. I mean, that creates a horrible vicious cycle. And that's what you're seeing right now. It's like there's no incentive for people to stay in Multnomah County when you're having that big of a disparity in your income tax. I mean, those are meaningful dollars, right? And yes, by design, we're doing this for preschool for all. I'm like, that's great. No one disagrees with that. Like, yes, it'd be awesome to have subsidies for childhood education and the burden that people bear and families bear from having to find daycare and childcare in those early days, right? But the way they set it up was terrible, right? And we just elected the architect of it, Jessica Vega Peterson, to be our county commissioner. So it's like, you can't, and I think what we're spending, the most expensive private school in the world, I think, is $125,000 in tuition. I think preschool for all this year spent $85,000 per student that had actually enrolled in preschool, right? I mean, that's not efficient use. And the fact that we continue to give these elected officials more of our income for product that just doesn't work, right? And totally ignore the private sector and totally ignore what it's doing to businesses. And yes, there's good intentions, but we all know what they say about good intentions. I don't have to remind you. It's a problem. And I think that's funny too, is like a lot of people just don't know. Either they don't know what they voted for or it doesn't affect them. It definitely was set up to not affect a lot of people, right? It was great design. Hey, we're gonna tax whatever, 1% to 2% of the population is gonna pay for all this. And most people are like, yeah, this doesn't affect me, why do I care? But also with inflation, right? And where you've seen the competitive job environment, I mean, you have building engineers, right? Who are now all of a sudden who are working at a building in Multnomah County and they're making, $110,000, $130,000 a year. And now they're getting taxed for this. And they live like, listen, I live in Wilsonville, right? And I don't have a preschooler. And just because I'm working in the city of Portland, I'm getting burdened with these taxes. I mean, they want to move, they want to leave, they want to go somewhere else. And so it's a major issue, and it's kind of incredible. Like, you'll sit down with even like some elected officials who don't even realize we're the highest tax county in the United States. I mean, that's a major red flag. And so, a lot of things. But I think that's something we just can't ignore, right? It's just, if you're looking at a competitive state, when you pass these kind of tax measures, I mean, you got to do them at a state or a federal level where there is an equalizer, right? So that you're not just going to get people moving around, right? And just, I mean, especially, in Oregon, right, where Portland is our biggest city, right? And it is where the bulk of investment has been made, right, in the state, is in the Portland metro area. The amount of infrastructure and all the effort and the planning, I mean, all the great things that we all love about Portland, right? I mean, there's been so much work to get the city sort of laid out to where it is, in architecture and planning and design, and it's all wonderful. And for basically, everyone's sort of turning their backs on it right now. And I think for the state to let Portland fail is a huge travesty, right? It should not happen. But I think it really needs to come from state leadership here. I think Governor Kotek, I hope, it feels like maybe she's, seeing some of these things and disagreeing with some of these things and recognizes there is a problem here and we need to fix it. So I hope she takes action towards that, as well as our state legislature. I mean, we're in the session right now. It's a good time to think about these things. But, when you're in an environment too, and we're doing a lot of work in Vancouver, Washington, I mean, to be able to just jump across the river 15 minutes from here and pay 0% state income tax, right? When it was 9.9, you're like, I like Portland, I like the restaurants, I like that weird idiosyncratic food options that I have, right? All those wonderful things we like about living here, housing stock, architecture, livability, great, right? But now it's like, man, I can just pop across the river. They got this great waterfront now. There's all this new economic development, and the city's sitting there sort of with open arms, like, this is great. You can't ignore that. And I think we're at that precipice of being in this vicious cycle of, and everything Chris was saying about, property taxes going down. Okay, well, what happens when revenue runs out? You cut services. Well, where do you make up that revenue? Well, you got to go tax more people, right? Not good. And so, I think the city, state, county, they have to take radical intervention right now to do something that is pro-business, right? And really, 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 really give the city, and especially the CBD, right, just because of the amount of investments are there, the steroid injection it needs to get back on track, because it's doable. Again, like guys in Austin, Texas, are leasing million square feet of office space. It's not an office issue, and I'm really also tired of, you keep hearing like, well, you know, we just got to convert some of these empty office buildings to multifamily. Well, yeah, that looks really good on paper. It is super hard to execute. Super, super hard to execute. And, you know, everyone's like, oh, these buildings are just going to all of a sudden become residential. Like, if I had to bet today, I bet you see maybe 4, right? Notable ones in the CBD, right? Of buildings that can do it. But, I mean, between building code, between the permitting issues we talked about, between seismic upgrades you got to do, our design review, a lot of the old pre-war buildings that are good conversion candidates, now you've got historic elements. So it's like, it's not an easy path, right? And also, like, we don't have a too much office problem. We don't have enough employees problem. That's the issue, right? We're not overbuilt in office like some other markets across the country. We're pretty balanced. If anything, we're underbuilt. You know, we're not San Francisco. We're not, you know, Dallas. Some of these, you know, markets where we're just putting up million-foot after million-foot towers. Like, we're not that. We're not there. So I take sort of offense and people, oh, we just have too much office. It's like, no, we just don't have enough businesses in our core, our core was designed, you know, to be the beacon of. So that is something that, you know, I think, again, we just have to pay attention to the facts, the data, and not ignore it, and not sort of get sucked into these alternative narratives. It's like, hey, this is what's going on here, and we can fix this. There is path. It does not have to be like this way. Like, I'm a firm believer in that. But it does take everyone not just sort of putting their head in the sand and sort of saying, you know, is what it is. We're never going to change that. We're never going to be able to shift politics in Portland. But if we don't, and we don't take an honest look at this, I do worry about the future. But I also, on the flip side, see it's a great city. There's so much that can go right for it. We don't, you know, San Francisco, for example, 100 million square foot office market. Anywhere now, the estimates are up to 40% potential vacancy in sublease vacancy space. I mean, that's 40 million square feet. That's a Portland and a half, right? It's nuts. I mean, that's going to be a big hole to dig out of, right? We don't have that here, fortunately. We're a small market, so the ability to rebound in Portland, I think, is much greater odds in our favor compared to a Seattle, a San Francisco, or some of these bigger markets that have seen just a massive exodus. So we have a chance to recover, but we can't sit on the sidelines, and I think the time is now, right? The time is now. You can't be like, oh, well, we'll get to it in the next legislative session, or we'll, you know, put a committee together to do a fact-finding mission. The answers are in front of everybody, but it's going to take the backbone of state, county, and local government to help fix this and address the fact that if we don't, it's not going to get better. And revenues are going to decline, and all the issues we're seeing now, which all these taxes we're paying are supposed to be fixing, are continuing to get worse. And, you know, what happens if you continue to lose funding? Well, again, you cut services. And I don't think any of us want to go there. I mean, I certainly don't. I live in Portland, right? I'm one of those people who actually say I live and work in Portland. But, you know, I'd be lying if I haven't looked at my wife and my kids and said, maybe this isn't the best place to be. But I don't want to leave. I really don't. I don't think any of us do who live here. It's a great frickin' city. It's beautiful. The access to amenities, the people, the neighborhoods are fantastic. We've done it such a disservice letting it get to what it is. And now I really believe in the business community having to take more of a backbone approach and not being scared of our own shadows to help get this back on track and make it the city that it was so great for so long. Anyways, thank you.
So a number of common themes in what we're discussing, but I think everybody's touched on the issue of people leaving the city. I want to open all the questions up to everybody, but maybe Jerry, because you have such a deep expertise in this, can you comment on the role that immigration has played in our economic expansion in Portland over the last several years?
Patrick mentioned the in-migration piece. That is really a critical piece that we're monitoring. We have to keep careful eye on. I mean, there's disagreement between the Census Bureau and Portland Pop Center about whether we're shrinking, declining. Even the Pop Center says even if we're not declining, we're growing remarkably slowly. The Portland metropolitan area has survived and thrived in the last several decades by attracting what they call the young creative class, right? We let other states take the subsidy of educating our population, and then we bring them, once they come out of college, to Portland. where they can live a college life still. They don't have to change their politics or their dress code. They can come to Portland and feel really comfortable. But we're losing that. And if we lose that, it's really important because our birth less deaths, our natural rate of growth is negative. Unless you're Salt Lake City, most major metro areas have a negative rate of growth. So we rely on in-migration. That's what makes us grow. I grew up in a declining Rust Belt city, Buffalo, New York. Terrible game last week. But when you go into decline, it's just awful. And you'd mentioned the fact, this terrible spiral of declining services, everyone leaves, and declining tax revenues, so tax rates go up, and you keep spiraling downward. It's a terrifying thing when it goes through that, but Portland hasn't had to deal with that because we've had growth. And we have a very tight labor market. We've always relied on people moving in, but they're not moving in. We're no longer the place everybody wants to come to. It's a Nashville thing now. It's an Austin thing. We had our point in time where we were it, and there's a real concern about the perception, because that takes years to change. It's not like people think about Portland every day and see, how's Portland doing this morning? It's just, they hear some negative things, and they start thinking less positively about Portland. And over time, it just takes a long time to reverse that. And we're super reliant on that, economically, for growth, obviously for all our residential product, for our employers, because they need labor force. We've been able to attract good labor force to Portland. All those issues are things we need to be concerned about, and no one's paying attention. We've got our first sort of shot across the bow with the negative number from the census, but everyone's watching that very closely. I know the state economist's office is very focused right now on what's happening with the population in migration rate, because that's a really key variable looking forward.
Yeah, can I add something to that? How many, just show of hands, this is actually pretty funny because I feel like every time I talk to someone just about everything that's going on, the problems we're facing, we have like this same sort of soundbite where, 2019, I'm sitting at an airport bar having a beer next to some random person. They ask, hey, where are you from? Oh, Portland, Oregon. Oh, God, I love Portland. It's so much fun. Wine country. I went to this bachelor party there, had this really weird dinner. It was great. Everyone, it was great. Everyone was so excited to learn more about you and you living there and all these things. Now, if I had that same conversation at airport, someone looks at me like I'm dying. They're like, oh, I'm so sorry. Are you okay? How is everything? And it's amazing how many other people I've talked to have had that same experience where some people are like, now you're even like, well, I'm from Oregon. I don't even want to go to Portland. And when I'm in, doing business in some of these red states, I'm like, yeah, I'm from, northwestern Idaho. Because they start looking at you like you're gonna, who knows what. But I think that's so much of the perception issue. It's like it went from being this great story and this great exciting place, which is all still here. Like a lot of those things are still here, but we've, again, with all the negative publicity and it's sort of just us continuing to not, try to drive the narrative in a better direction, which is, I think, getting more businesses here, more people here, getting people coming back into enjoying that Portland experience they had before. We're just going to continue to, unfortunately, be in that, second part of that vicious cycle, right? Of where, everyone's feeling bad for you because you live in Portland, which shouldn't be the case.
I think in preparation of this panel, I was reading just various news coverage over the years of our city, and one quote I really liked from the New York Times that I think speaks to this. It's a 2015 article, 36 Hours in Portland. They wrote, "There is no place in the country better known as a bastion of good living, leisure, and happy inebriation than Oregon's largest little city, the low-lying mini metropolis of Portland." And I think that just does a good job of encapsulating the 2019 type conversations that you were mentioning. Switching gears a little, Chris, the clients you work with, particularly in the downtown core, are they appealing their property taxes? And if so, to what extent? I know that recently the San Francisco Comptroller's Office completed a study that indicated that they're forecasting that in 2028, they may lose $100 to $200 million in property tax revenue as a result of downtown office vacancy.
Well, thanks, Julia. If landlords aren't looking at their property taxes and their assessments, they certainly should be. We are appealing a high percentage of the office buildings, major office buildings in in Portland. You know, there's different classes. You have your Class A, you have your Class B, you have your Class C, and you have your historic buildings. And unfortunately, I mean, no class has been spared. They're all experiencing vacancy issues, and it's just not vacancy. It's net effective rent. Is in order to lease space in this challenging environment, you may try to hold on to your coupon rent, but the givebacks in terms of rent abatements, free rent, generous tenant improvements, you know, it has a real impact. So yes, we're very active in that market. I would say in those historic B and C, they are very vulnerable. Many of them are located kind of in the ground zero of the homeless, the tents, the crime. I have one client who was talking to, and I said, well, tell me what's going on in the neighborhood. He said, well, we had someone killed outside our front door this last year. And so that's how much, I mean, how challenging it is for leasing brokers, for landlords right now, is to lease the vacant space that they have and to keep compete with the sublet space that's out there. So it's a real challenge.
Thank you. And then, kind of on a related note, there's a national trend of tenants moving into more amenitized Class A space, and you talked about the trends that we've seen it play out here in our city. Can you talk a little bit more about how you see the implications you see for owners of Class B and Class C office buildings?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're already seeing that. If you look at what's happening and what's going to happen this year, the default rates in Class B and Class C are going to be significantly higher than Class A. There are already buildings that are going back to the bank now, have gone back to the bank. There are some banks that are saying, no, thank you, we don't want that, let's work it out. So that's gonna play out over the next couple of years. I would say, I know we talked a lot about where the activity is, what's the bright spot, and I do think there are bright spots, and what you're seeing is that there's a gravitational pull, to the Pearl and Northwest, and so a common call that we get is, yeah, I'll stay in the urban core, but I only want to look Pearl Northwest. And I know Patrick relayed the economic issue with these conversions. Property tax abatement is not enough. There are much smarter people than me in our office looking deep into this right now who could probably speak to it better. But what I will say is that people are very attracted to the 18-hour district. So when there's people on the street at night, going to dinner, going out, living where the workplaces are, it feels safer, it feels more vibrant. When you're in some of the areas in our traditional CBD that shut down at 5 p.m. and you're the only person on the street, at least the only business person, people don't feel as safe. They don't have the amenities that they want around them. So it's having a real impact in where the tenant activity is.
And any other comments on that subject?
Yeah, I think one thing too that just seems to get ignored, I think, again, if you look at sort of just the narratives that go around, especially sort of the anti-landlord narratives, right? Because it's easy to think your landlord's, the monopoly guy and living in his Scrooge McDuck mansion with a, pool of coins and swimming through it. But, really this last, I think, decade, Portland has become an institutional market, right, for investment. And what people don't realize, a lot of those institutions are, they're pension funds, they're endowments. I mean, we own, one of our biggest assets is owned by the major investor is the Teachers Retirement Corporation of Illinois, right? It's retired teacher pension funds going to work, right? And so, when you get this rhetoric of, landlords, and we shouldn't worry about these, wealthy people who own these buildings. I'm like, well, this is retired teachers who really own this building. I'm just a service provider. I mean, most of what I do is a service provider element, right? I'm there to bring the book of services that Lincoln Property Company can deploy to operate buildings, right? And as Portland became institutional, that's even in multifamily too, industrial. It's owned by these bigger funds and these bigger consortiums of very, very diverse investors, right? And so, it's not just affecting, the stigmatized, monopoly guy. It's really affecting just people who now are able to allocate dollars into business lines they weren't able to before. So, that's one thing, again, and that's just education, right? Just, again, most general people who are not in real estate don't understand that, and a lot of our politicians do not either. And so it's not just affecting the wealthy, it's affecting a lot of different people from all walks of life when, again, our real estate investments can fail. And the amount of equity that's been wiped out in Portland, and God knows how much it is, billions of dollars, has to be. I haven't done the math, but I mean, you can just sit there and you look at, okay, what's book values on all these assets now when you run into a vacancy rate like this, or you run into a business-friendly and unfriendly environment like this? I mean, that's wealth that just gets destroyed, right? And that's, if you're an institutional capital, which is, again, what's probably the bulk of the transactions and major transactions, right, in the urban core have been, those guys aren't, once that equity's wiped out, they're going to find a market that's going to be more appreciative of them, right? They're going to go to, capital's efficient, right? We live in a very efficient economy in that sense, and they're just going to go where there's a safer place to put their money, not having these wild economic swings, right? And it just takes a long time for that to recover too. And that's what's, the way we've upzoned so much of through great planning, right? With all the new heights we've added to downtown and these areas we want to see go vertical and not sprawl. Well, the dollars for those assets is tremendous, right? To build a type 1 building at 250 feet tall, that's a lot of freaking money, right? And, a couple investors emptying their pig and pigs probably aren't going to do that. It's going to come from the institutional capital world to see things like that go again. If those folks don't want to come back to Portland, then you're not going to see that infill development that so much time and effort has been allocated to develop. And that's a shame, right? It really is.
It is, and I've been active in this market for 30-some years. And we used to just be a weird little market that never got institutional investment. It was only in the last decade or so that suddenly we had cap rates that were consistent with national investors and institutional investors coming to this market. And that's my concern. As that investment perception changes, do we lose that position? Because it affects everything all the way down the line.
I think that's a great point. And I think another piece of it is with the institutional investment, we also saw lenders participate in this market that historically were not active in Portland. And so we talked about our city's reputation with respect to immigration, but I'd love to hear thoughts on how our reputation impacts lender perception, particularly in light of the distressed debt that we're seeing come to the market, as Kayla mentioned.
Patrick?
Oh boy. Yeah, Julie, you read off that ULI fact this morning. Everyone should be paying attention to that. And it's the same thing, kind of goes back to my airport conversation, right? When we were putting deals together and looking for capital back pre-COVID, pre-pandemic, pre-2020, everybody wanted to talk to you, right? It was, let's hear more. We're really interested in this market, and this is exciting, this is great. And it's allowed, so many great assets to come alive, right? Could have we taken a Wells Fargo Center to what it is today, which I think is amazing, thank you. Could we have done that, in a non-institutional environment? Absolutely not, no way. Pac West, no way, right? Our Fremont apartment tower, right? No way. And Mr. Klassen, I see you in the front row. I know you battled me a long time on that, but I appreciate it. Those were people would have never been able to underwrite something like that, right? So all these great things and this great architecture and buildings you've seen kind of come out the last decade are the result of institutional capital flows, better debt coming in the market, lower cost of capital to finance these things, right? And we're back now where you make those calls and it's like the other airport conversation where everyone's like, yeah, no, I don't think so. We're not ready to start talking about Portland yet. And we're busy in Nashville, or we're busy in Austin, or we're busy in Salt Lake. We want to learn more about what's going on in Boise. I mean, good Lord, Boise's, hot as it can be. And Boise, Idaho, I mean, when I was, 10 years ago, if you said, hey, I'm going to Boise, Idaho, I'd be like, why, right? How much potato business can there be? So, it's a problem. It really is. And again, if you look at, everyone's like, well, there's going to be these great opportunities, and, some of these buildings that maybe shouldn't have been so expensive now will be more affordable. I'm like, well, yeah, but even if you're going to have to go buy it unlevered. You're not going to be able to finance it. If it needs a big capital infusion, people are going to be skeptical of that, right? And like Kayla said, the conversion thing is kind of a canard. I mean, I know it looks great on paper. The markets have been very successful at New York, Midwest, right? I mean, the Midwest, there's buildings selling for like $20 a foot. If that happens in Portland, that's a bad day for everybody. A really bad day for everyone in this room, bad day especially for the local government, because that tax reset's not going to be fun, right? And they also don't have seismic issues in those markets, right? We do, and that's a huge cost, right? And it's also, our building code changes our seismic, assumptions every week, it feels like, right, when we're trying to do things. So again, we have to get back to a reputable position. If we want to continue to see good architecture, we want to see good projects, we want to see good buildings come back to this market, which I think we all do. I think just everyone in Portland would agree with that, I think. But we have to make it, the real estate is an institutional market. It is now. It wasn't maybe 20, 30 years ago, but it is the majority of how business flows in this space. And I don't think that's going anywhere. But those dollars will find new homes and places where they're more appreciative. And we need to do the same.
Okay, I saw you reacting a lot.
Yeah, I would say, let me put in a bright spot here. If some of the fundamental issues could be overcome here in terms of what's happened to the attractiveness, what's happened to the image of Portland, I do think the perception is really important in the lending space. It's a cause for a lot more questions. So you'll see our research churning and rechurning numbers over and over to get debt secured this last year. It's not impossible, but it is very hard. The thing that I would say is at the top of that list that Patrick's referring to, Seattle was very close to the top this last year. Portland was very close to the bottom of lender perception. I think this next year, we're going to see a change in that. So, Seattle is a very cyclical market. It is very slanted to a particular industry, which is the tech industry. Portland is a much more diversified market. Our industry segments are by no means dominated like what Seattle is. So we have the opportunity here to outlast a recession in a way that other markets are going to see a big swing because of it. But we do need to fix both the perceived and real issues around the city to have that as a selling point.
Then I want to switch gears for a second and go back to some of what Jerry talked about in his presentation. So Jerry, you touched on the impact that permitting timeline has on costs. Developers, can you expand on that and then also talk about it in the context of our housing affordability crisis?
I mean, everyone, in this room probably understands the time value of money, right? And the fact that, time costs money. And here we basically have a differential in permits that's roughly equivalent to like 7 months. Well, 7 months of time on a deal is a lot of money. But like we always stress, long-term, we talk about affordability. Everything's about affordability, and almost every housing affordability we do makes housing less affordable. I mean, we almost have a perfect record of doing the absolute wrong thing for every policy issue. You talk about the road to someplace being, paved with good intentions. We have a lot of well-intentioned people that continually trip over themselves and do the wrong thing. But long-term, what happens is rents have to be replacement cost, right? The important thing long-term is replacement cost. How much does it cost Patrick to produce a unit? Am I going to deliver it $350,000 a door in this location, or is I going to deliver it $450,000 a door? That affects what my rent needs to be, right? That affects what I need for replacement costs. And overall, you look at market conditions, and the market gets loose and it gets tight, and we go through business cycles. But long run, the rent levels will radiate around, the little wave goes around replacement costs. And everything we do that makes things cost more to do, that makes construction more difficult, the development process more costly, that we add stuff, inclusionary zoning, anything else we're going to do that increase costs, increase replacement costs, which means everything goes up. And it's not just the new product, because if you've got B product that's priced at a 15% discount off the brand new Type A coming out, and Type A goes up 20%, you go up 20%, right? You've maintained your discount, but you go up as well. So what we lose all the time is we do all these policies that make it more expensive to produce new product, which then moves the entire spectrum of housing in the market upward, puts upward pressure on them. Inversely, like the rent control piece, which is, an irrelevancy as it's currently written, particularly when we have inflation at like 8%, right? But everything starts moving up, and so everyone is worse off, and then the response to that is more policies, I think, that are ill-founded and actually counterproductive and make things more difficult. So long run, whenever we look at this, we try to strip everything away from what people intended to do and try to figure out what people actually did. We look at, have you made it less or more expensive to develop housing? Have you made it easier or more difficult to develop what you actually are trying to encourage? We try to encourage housing production, right, because we're recognizing now at a statewide level that housing supply is one of our big issues. We've been underproducing housing for a decade now. And so we tax the production of housing. We tax the behavior we're trying to encourage, which is just insane, but actually completely predictable. So.
And if you want to talk about another comparison between Seattle and Portland, we obviously track things like affordability and livability, and it was always our big sell in Portland of we don't have as many people, we don't have the universities, but great quality of life, lower cost of living, all those things. And if you look at what happened after the affordable housing passage in Portland, the median cost of purchasing a home, Seattle compared to Portland, is very much what you think it would be. It's much more expensive to purchase a home in Seattle. But the apartment rents started to not track in the way that you should, i.e. being in Portland in an average apartment started to go up, so we were almost kissing where Seattle is for a period of time because the pipeline shut off to delivery of those units. So all of a sudden, living in your one bedroom in Portland was a lot less affordable than it should be based on, overall wages, the size of the metro, et cetera.
And with respect to the permitting process, are there lessons that we can learn from other cities to make things more expedited and efficient?
I'll take that one again. We have a project in Idaho, and permit turnaround was 8 weeks, and they were like ashamed of it. They're like, sorry, usually it's 6, but we're really busy right now. And just like, oh, great, okay. But I mean, our some of the great things that have attributed to Portland design and architecture, right? We have the design review process, which there was, I think, an interesting stat. Someone would have to fact check me on it, but I remember talking about it a couple years ago, that the layers of our design guidelines in Portland for new buildings, apples to apples, is more expensive than what you'd have in Seattle, right? Because of the sort of, for all of you who've been through a DR hearing, right, it's about as fun as getting a root canal. And that's kind of a disturbing trend, right? Because now we're in a market that should be more affordable than San Francisco or Seattle, but we're forcing our buildings to be more expensive because all these things we talked about, right? We want this sort of fenestration. We'd really like to see these materials. And some of those things are great, right? But it's also like, well, that's expensive. It just is, right? Bird glass, all these things we put on buildings that are, ratchet up the cost like tremendously. And again, good intentions, right? We'll get it. But it's not solving anything. And then also, when we look at it's sort of amazing, for affordable housing, why there's not more effort to buy existing product is beyond me, right? Because just like like Jerry was saying, it's like when you are sort of when you're building all this new construction and every other landlord's saying like, great, that's $3, I'll be $2.40. But originally I was, $1.70, a couple years ago. Well, who's that affecting? Well, it's affecting the people who are going to be most rent sensitive in those buildings, right? And so like the fact that we're not sort of maintaining naturally occurring affordable housing, right? In the sense of why not just go buy a big garden style complex with those dollars, keep rents totally static and inelastic, fix it up. Great, go and put new countertops and carpet and paint it and put a community center, like all these great things that you're going to find in a modern affordable building, but like at a deep fraction to what it would cost for replacement. Like why we're not doing that is very strange. I don't know why, but I'm not in that policy world, unfortunately. So it's like they're all, there's very like pragmatic solutions, but like no one for whatever reason wants to talk about them, no one wants to face them. That I think would solve a lot of these issues. And then, you'd see a ton of new housing coming on because, okay, now we can build market rate. We don't have this complex layer of inclusionary zoning, which again, understand the intent of it, like totally get it. It makes a ton of sense. But like you're offsetting the other units to subsidize that rate because that is just the cost of capital to finance a project. There's not like this magic, deep discount of financing that's out there that you can go pull a buck from. You're going out to institutional markets, which is a global phenomenon, to build assets of that caliber and that size and that density, which I think, again, everybody wants, density. So the answers are all right in front of us, but again, it's for whatever reason, we tend to just tiptoe around them or not want to face them at all.
I saw a lot of nodding heads. Anybody else want to comment?
Well, a couple of points. I think it's going to take the private sector to drive better policy in partnership with the powers that be. I think that's really necessary, and it's not just about money. I read an article the other day that the city of Portland burned through a ton of money to deal with the homeless situation, and you didn't see any material change. So it's not just money, but it's an action plan. What are you going to do? When are you going to do it? How are you going to do it? And be transparent about it. And, that's the way out of this.
It has to be a workable plan, though. That's the issue. They have a lot of plans, and they actually carry through with them. They're just bad plans.
Well, I think this to me is probably the most important question of the panel, and I'd love to hear from all of the panelists. With respect to the matters we've talked about today, what do you think that people can do both individually and what can we do collectively as Revitalize Portland Coalition to impact change?
I don't have the answer to this. I live and work downtown. I live in Portland and I work downtown, and it's more of stubbornness. We're down on Broadway and Alder, right in the heart of crazy land, and we get people yelling their manifestos all the time from my window because I'm on the 6th floor, and you can hear it because we're single glazed, rehab building. And the biggest issue has just been, can we get things going downtown? I mean, one of the issues I have that's been a really sort of a sticking part for me is the city of Portland still isn't down there. They don't have their people down there. How's the coffee store going to stay in business when there's nobody down there? I mean, the police department can't even have their windows shown, right? Our police department's boarded up like it's a fort. We've got the downtown, there's no one down there for the city. They're all exhorting everybody to get the business community to get something done, but they won't step up to do anything themselves. So I'd like to see it as a start. I mean, obviously everything downtown, my landlord's working and stuff, people are trying to get stuff downtown, but we really need sort of a change in perception. And I'm afraid it's going to take time, and it's a problem, because I don't think anyone's feeling super flush. Probably if you have a portfolio downtown and you're feeling like this is a time to invest more money. But, if we don't invest, I think we disinvest, so.
I think it's important that, for a lot of folks who are like, I'm just going to move to Lake Oswego. Like, that's not the solution, right? I mean, it is a short-term fix, but I think the negative impacts of Portland affect the entire state. I mean, that's just a given, right? And some of these playbooks, right? There's now a preschool for all measure that's being discussed in Washington County, right? So like, things will trickle out. Like you kind of have to face what's going on and educate people. I think that's one big part. People just don't know. They just read what they see in the Willamette Week or the Oregonian, and that's it. And but they're not. There's so much nuance, right, that are outside the headlines. That again, when it's shocking that government officials didn't realize we were the highest tax county in the United States, right? And they're making these policies. Like that is just a lack of education. Right, and that relies on all of us, right? I mean, everybody, anyone who's a concerned Portland or even Oregonian should be, we can't just go business as usual. Oh, it's going to fix itself and we'll be fine. I think you have to voice up about this stuff, right? And it shouldn't be controversial. It's just a matter of like, here's the data. Like, this is what's going to happen. This affects our livelihood. This affects my decisions I make as a business and my employees, right? Those are real people too. It's not just this myopic world that, politics, that's all that matters. And so, again, I think everyone really just needs to, put their backbone into it and work on, get that meeting with a city council member, get that meeting with the county, write emails. There's some great ways that are going around from Vitalize Portland and others of how to just connect. I mean, because I think it does make an impact. It may not as big as one as we hope, but it's still, if we just sit and kind of go about business as usual, I don't think we're not going to get out of this. It's really going to take everyone, recognizing there's a problem and how do we fix it. And again, I really believe that the public sector needs to look at the private sector to help fix this. I really believe that. Because everyone, that's all we do all day. We do these things. We understand how real estate really works, and they just don't. I mean, they don't. It's okay. They've got to be focused on all this other stuff. I get it. But if we're not giving them that advice and we're not reaching out and saying, hey guys, no, you don't see it. This is what is on the ground. This is what is actually happening from people who are working downtown, living downtown, talking to our tenants, talking to these businesses, understanding how they think. Like they need that feedback. And so it's on all of us to do that, or else again, I think, that there is a way out. I truly believe like if there is a path and the recovery that can happen in Portland, like it's there. But if we're just expecting to happen on its own, I think that's just, we're going to all be disappointed a few years from now.
Thanks, Pat. Chris?
What was the question? I think all the business organizations, NAIOB, BOMA, and Jordan Schnitzer's initiatives with Eric Cole can make a difference. And I think educating the governor is a place to start, because as Portland goes, Oregon goes. And so there is the opportunity to make things better. And to Jerry's point, I think the private sector can influence policy making. So we have better policy. And those are my thoughts.
Yeah, so I'm going to echo some of the comments about City of Portland and business accountability. I mean, again, people vote with their feet, and people being downtown and patronizing the businesses in downtown is critical to having what I think everyone wants, which is a vibrant city center. I think, the City of Portland has voiced a commitment to bring people back 2 days a week starting in April. I think holding their feet to the fire on that. But there is a position for business. We would love to see other businesses commit to say, if you bring back, all your hybrid and previously on-site employees 2+ days a week, we will too. We'd love to see that sort of commitment in the form of a letter from the business community, because that's going to make a huge difference. And when you go downtown once a week and you're like, oh gosh, there's nowhere to go for lunch anymore. Well, you have to be there. You have to be patronizing. You have to support with your own presence and with your money to support these businesses. So that's something that's huge. I think the involvement that people said, getting involved in an OBI, or they're the one that commissioned the EY study that everyone talked about, where we've suddenly realized Portland has the second highest effective tax rate, only to New York city over 25 million. So really, we have the highest effective tax rate if you're making as a single earner 125,000 or above. So a really low bar. So patronizing and getting involved in those sorts of organizations that are speaking to the state, that are lobbying on behalf of businesses, those are the best things I feel like you can do as an individual or a business owner.
And what are thoughts on, I think Jerry's comment really resonated with me on the amount of time it'll take to reverse the reputation. Do you have thoughts on lower hanging fruit that we can pursue, just quicker ways to enact change and help build momentum?
I have an idea. And listen, I sit there and I always see like, oh, hey, we're putting more Christmas lights up in the park and it's going to change. Like, those are all great things, but they're not solutions to our problem. And so I've kind of always, while I love some of those efforts you're seeing, like for pop-ups and all these great stuff, okay, great, that's awesome, fine. But it's like, that's not going to fix our city, right? A free concert in Pioneer Square is not going to save Portland, unfortunately. I don't think. Though it's a free concert, so go enjoy it. I mean, I think there's radical intervention ideas that are, you've seen in other metro areas, enterprise zones, right? If you said, hey, what if we let's draw a circle around where we think our biggest issues are in downtown, central city, whatever the ring is, call it, invisible line. And we said, hey, we're gonna put an enterprise zone for anyone that works and locates their business in this circle, and we're gonna balance out your income tax with that of the next, adjacent area or state level. And the state's gonna subsidize that, right? So Multnomah County, you still get all your taxes for preschool and Here Together and all those things, great, right? The state's gonna subsidize the rest of it to bring that activity. I mean, to me, I feel like that would be a massive just steroid injection right in the arm for our downtown, or whatever what's in that invisible line, right? Because people would be like, okay, well now I'm not getting punished to work in Multnomah County anymore, right? From a financial standpoint. I mean, things like that. I mean, those I don't think are impossible. Again, I'm not an economist. I'm not a policymaker. I'm just a lowly real estate guy. But I think that's the kind of things you have to do. And you've seen those in other markets, like, for example, San Francisco, right? Mid-Market Street, for all of you who know that area, right? That was when they built BART back in the late 60s, they had to shut down all of Market Street. And Market Street was like the economic viaduct for San Francisco, right? That's where it all centered right on the ferry building, and it split the city, all the way up to the hills into downtown, to the waterfront. But they put BART straight down it, and they basically closed Market Street for like years, right? And everything got boarded up, all the retail died, and it just never came back, never what it was. And Mayor Ed Lee looked at that and said, hey, well, God, how do we, and it was, crime, drugs, vacancies, just everything was not good there. I said, well, how do we kind of try to revitalize this? And they put, basically it was a business employment tax rebate for folks that would move their business there. And that's really what got Twitter into that part of town, taking the old Merchandise Mart, which is huge, big, empty, old, vacant, distraught building. And because originally they were gonna go to Silicon Valley. I remember talking to teammates who were looking at them more down in the peninsula area. And that lured him back to San Francisco. Well, then you saw Uber go there, right? Then you saw all these startups go there, Zendesk, these other businesses that, then grew, and mid-market all of a sudden became like a pretty cool little area, right? From a very troubled spot to a very cool area. So it was a great experiment. And so those things have been done before, but there has to be an incentive, right? People aren't just gonna do it out of the goodness, like, oh, I'm gonna go to Portland because I'm stubborn, I wanna pay more taxes. Like, no one's gonna say that, right? They're just not. So I think they have to do something drastic like that and not be afraid to do it.
And do you think, I don't want to cut you off.
Sure, no, you're fine.
Do you think that there's the political will to see something like that happen here?
Probably not.
Let me rephrase. Do you think it's politically viable?
It shouldn't be political. That's the problem. Like, everyone wants to make these things political, but it's just facts. It's just data. It's just how people think. Right? We're humans. We believe in incentive. Like, that's how we do things. So get out of bed in the morning, right? You have an incentive to do so. Go to work. You have an incentive to do so, right? Like, that's been since we've been, whatever, amoebas, right? There's an incentive. And so that's like, it doesn't need to be political. No, certainly a lot of people want to make it political, right? That's just, why not? There's a business in that, right? That's a whole industrial complex on its own. But it doesn't, like, I don't see it being political. I see it being like, hey, this is a way you fix a major problem by incentivizing people to be here who don't want to be here right now.
And I do think there's going to be, I asked a lobbyist who came and spoke to another organization the other week this question. I said, do they care about the taxes? And his answer was no, which I questioned. And what he said is the in-migration numbers is something that he does feel there's going to be close attention paid to in the state capitol this year. So I think that is something that, a state administrator is going to look at and say, hey, what's going on here? Why is this out-migration so high? So I would say that is my hope at looking at creative solutions. I would say the other thing, just at a minimum, we have to think about crime and safety downtown. If, someone comes in from Beaverton for the first time in a couple months to go out to a concert and their window is bashed in while they're at that concert, they're going to say, you know what, I'm just going to go out in downtown Beaverton. I'm not going to come back downtown. And I say this because it happened to two of my suburban friends this last month. So, these things are real, and it does impact where people come and where people spend their dollars and feel safe doing so.
My add to that is going to the question about political will. I think it's education. Yeah. Got to educate the powers that be that you need to work with us and develop an action plan. And that's the second piece is we have an action plan. We are making things better, and I think that can change the perception of Portland.
I do totally agree with the education piece, and that, yes, I mentioned we have bad policies, but it's not because we want to have bad policies. I think the leaders are totally open to good policies. They just need to know what those are, and the education has to go out so that there's political support behind it, that they're not on the bleeding edge of trying to explain this to people. It's very simple to substitute bad policies for good policies. You just need to get the good policies in front of people and explain it.
Great. And then this will probably be our last question. We've had what could be described as kind of a doom and gloom conversation. Are there any positives? Are there any positives that can be highlighted?
Well, I think it's in this room. And, if you're convinced that you need to do something to make things better, we'll all benefit. It's easy to go back to the office and, get back to work and focus on what's in front of you. But I do think we need to have a concerted effort to support good policy, and it's the private sector that needs to drive it.
Yeah, and I would say, just going back to the fundamentals of our city, if we can remember all the positive things that we have here, really, we have that ability to be a live, work, play destination. Again, we have a much more diversified economy that is way more resilient in these cycles than what you're going to see up in Seattle or in San Francisco. We didn't overbuild like other cities did in these cycles. So we have a lot of positive fundamentals here, and I think people would be wise to remember that as a bright spot.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think, again, it's, when you look out your window and you see Mount Hood, or, you're 45 minutes to wine country, or hour and a half to being on a ski slope, I mean, that's pretty unique, right? It doesn't happen in a lot of other cities. Just have the diversity of amenities that are here, and that's always going to be a driver. And I think that's been, those facts have probably been sort of abused to back into some of the policy that we have today currently. Like, well, people just keep coming here, so we can just keep throwing mud at the place, and they'll just take it because they want to go to wine country. Well, okay, at some point you're just going to be like, I'm just not going to go to wine country. And so, I think, again, just where we are is so great, right? And I do feel like, we are, I'm on a few different task force with the city, and you're seeing they're inklings, but you're seeing efforts coming out of City Hall to engage, right, the private sector a bit more than they have been. Now, is it enough? Absolutely not. Are they listening to everything you say? Absolutely not, right? But it's, those are, I think, green shoots, right, that weren't probably there in the last election cycle. And I feel like you feel like you have a city council that's kind of willing to put their neck out a bit more than they have in the past to really look at the data and actually understand economics. Maybe they're not in 201 yet, but they're still in 101, maybe, hopefully. So I think those are good signs. But I just hope, again, I think we're all going to need to pressure, our elected officials to not stop that momentum, right? You got to keep pushing that forward. It needs to be greater and greater as we kind of go through these evolutions.
Yeah, I think there's this tendency in the business community to see of business as the government is something we endure, right? We just wait to see what dumb idea they're going to come up with, and then we try to deal with it, right? But we need to be engaged. We've got the right answers in this group. I mean, there's people who are interested. You actually have the political leaders do want to know. They're recognizing that this is not working, right? And they want a better answer. So I think they are open, but do understand the people with the bad answers will show up to all these meetings. And they will be there in force, and you're going to have to take some abuse. You're going to have to go to meetings that are really boring and spend some time, and it's tough. And maybe you have staff members you can send to do that or something. But you just can't disengage, and I think historically this happens in the business community, is we disengage because we find the process annoying and irritating. We just want to get on to business. But if we don't engage in the policy piece, I think we lose the whole thing. So we've got to really make sure we're staying in there.
I think that's a wonderful note to end on. Jerry, Pat, Chris, Kayla, thanks very much.
Hold on one second, guys. I wasn't going to speak, but I think it's important to answer since I've been funding this whole effort. I think as many of you know, I have offices in Seattle, Portland, San Francisco, Sacramento, Las Vegas, San Diego, Tucson, and Phoenix. So for years I've seen a perspective, and I can go on with data like Jerry has with all those cities about you name it. For years I've said Portland's success has not been that we've had good alignment on our private and public sectors. It's because of the huge economic engine in Puget Sound, the Bay Area. LA is expensive. We've gotten the people have come here not because they were so excited about coming here, but it was more affordable, plus all the wonderful amenities we have. Chris talked about the tax situation, and we've used his firm. I'm so proud of him, known him since high school. But you're going to see a drop in taxes at the city level of probably $50 or $75 million. The Business Journal in San Francisco week before last was projecting $289 million loss there as these buildings go down in value. How the city's going to manage through that, I don't have a clue. But I think the hopeful spot is this to end up with something. Last year, a year ago, December, when I spoke to Iram and said, we in the real estate community, and Pat talked about that. In this room, on this podium, the other organizations, we know how to solve industrial, office, retail, senior housing, student housing, medical, you name the real estate solution. There are experts within our community and all these organizations that can come up with solutions. The sad thing is that no one seems to listen to us very much. That's been a common complaint all along. It's not that there aren't solutions, it's that if you look at the backgrounds of our elected officials at the city and the county, okay, and without getting into names and so forth, there isn't any one of them, except Renee Gonzalez now, who was a real estate attorney at Stoll Reeves, there isn't any one of them that really has any real business experience. Most of them have done a wonderful job with social service agencies, which are important for a community, but would you hire them in terms of real estate solutions? They don't have a clue. So I think here's one bright light, because and Chris Robinson said it before, how Portland goes, the state goes. It's always bugged me that office always gets all the attention, okay, and yet, the other asset types are just as wonderful as office. But office does get the attention, whether it's LA, Manhattan, San Francisco, Seattle, Austin, wherever it is. So when we see what's going to happen this next 36 months, Julia mentioned New York Life foreclosed on One Main Place, the old natural gas building, and the building on 6th at Columbia that the photo supply place was in. Then I forget who else foreclosed 2 weeks ago on Harrison Square, ADP Plaza, and another one. CB did a study for U.S. Bank. There are 30 CMBS loans on office buildings downtown, all of which are underwater, and that come up in the next 36 months. Downtown is going to be, you were more optimistic than I was, a disaster, okay? And values are going to plunge. As Pat said, anyone that's done an analysis about what it costs to convert an office building to residential, unless you're in a market like New York, where a studio apartment is $7,000 to $8,000 a month, a one-bedroom is $12,000 or $14,000, a two-bedroom is $18,000 to $25,000, the numbers just aren't there. So as you said, it's a dream. But here's something that is optimistic. The mayor came over last week when I was having dinner, and I've known him for years. I used to text him a lot, gave him great ideas, nothing ever happened. And I mentioned about this group. And I said, I really want you to meet some of the leaders of this group because we're here to serve you. And he was receptive. His schedule was called to set up a time with the board and so forth. But here is a silver lining in one thing that I think is a disaster. This new charter amendment, I don't think people understood what they were getting. Aside from the $42 million estimated cost of now having 12 city commissioners, which I think is crazy, with this rank voting, you're going to see a lot of people get elected with small, I don't mean minority as a race issue, as a small number of voters. That also gives us a chance from the business community to rally around and get some business people on the city council. So think about that for a second. And that's where if we organize ourselves and find a couple folks that are willing and dedicated, just as you were saying, which you have to go through, to be on city council with a business perspective, that could be a voice from the inside, and that's 2 years away. But in the meantime, think about this group for a second. When I challenged everyone a year ago, December, could we get all the real estate organizations together? And by gosh, we've done that. And everyone's gotten along. It is amazing. The dozen organizations all aligned towards the pre-agreed issues. So we have to pat ourselves on the back that that's been remarkable. Now the issue is, unless this group really gets in to making a difference in policy, we can have all these symposiums and all the monthly meetings, and it won't make a difference. All we'll do is complain about the same things. So I think what this involves then is stepping up the next level of involvement, because we have the structure with this organization. Eric's doing a heck of a job, good background, and I think this group can make a difference. The Portland Business Alliance is a good organization. Somehow it hasn't seemed to do what at least I hoped and many hope this group might do. So there's the challenge to everyone. Let's think ahead to those elections in 2 years. Let's also think about getting involved this year on some specific action steps, and let's ramp up the communication. The mayor's receptive, Dr. Renee, others, about our meeting, because the key is, while Pat, you're mentioning some task forces, the last time this city really functioned super well was when Neil Goldschmidt was mayor. And he had all these task forces of the best and brightest of people, like all of you, with city officials, and they came up with amazing ideas. Bureaucracy did a pretty good job, too. As to why the public officials have been so afraid or loath or intimidated by bringing other people in, the arrogance that they think they have all the answers. None of us have all the answers, but collectively we can come up with the best and brightest ideas to help turn the city around. So think about getting more involved with the Revitalize, or otherwise there's no point in having it, and let's set up some of these meetings and see in the next 90 days if we can get some public officials to reach out. What I said to Ted was, this group is there to serve you. We're there to serve you. So thanks for coming, and I'm so proud of all the leadership and all of you. But this is a chance to take what we've built upon in these last 12 months and really use it as a vehicle to not just talk about issues, but to develop action steps and execute to make a difference. Thank you.
Jordan for mayor.
Thank you all so much. Thanks, everyone, for sticking with us. We have a few more minutes. As our panelists mentioned, you guys are free to, yeah, it's whatever you'd like. As our panelists mentioned, it's all about education, and we hope today was a great education opportunity for you. As Julia mentioned, we just commissioned Jerry with that survey. JLL has not launched that survey to the public yet, so this is the very first that anybody's seeing these studies. So again, RPC right now is in this data gathering stage, right? As we go to the city and the public officials, we have to have the data in our pocket to say, these are the issues, or else they look at us and say, well, tell me that the vacancy is actually that. And we go, okay, fine. Well, now we have Kayla's study that we can actually show you. So with that being said, I'm going to turn it over to Caitlin, who is an intern with Schnitzer Properties on Revitalize Portland Coalition, and she's going to go over some of our inner mapping work that we're doing on downtown tent counts, boarded up windows, graffiti, the actual very specific data that we are collecting in order to go to our public officials with a big education-based data. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you. Yeah, so my name's Caitlin Dendis, and I'm partnered with Heather Rector. We both signed you in today. We're both first-year graduate students at Portland State in urban and regional planning. And with RPC, we have been working on the analysis of the downtown streetscapes. So we started with data collection via walk-by observations. So Heather and I went out in October, November, and December of 2022 and got our steps in. And after phase one, our goal is to narrow in on highly impacted locations to identify buildings in distress. And we've already narrowed in a couple and are following along with who owns the building and what's happening with the building. And then phase three would have collaboration with those buildings in distress, with the owners, management companies, business owners, and others in the area to receive adequate funding for business repairs or reinvestment in the building. We've already started handing out graffiti waivers and getting the process started with those. Next slide, please. So when we talk about downtown Portland, what we are referring to is the downtown neighborhood outline, which is drawn by the city of Portland itself. So it does exclude Old Town and the Pearl, and we go off of these boundary lines when we're referring to what we're looking at. Next slide. So our methods were to walk, and with maps like this one on your right, and we went by and took eye observations and mapped it down. And again, we went through October, November, and December, and we went through the core section in small walkable areas. Next slide, please. So this is kind of how it ended up looking like. That's the same map after Heather went out and she collected the time, and then these are the symbols we used to iterate when we got back to the office what it meant. So we had these in hand with us and we walked out in October, November, and December. Next slide. So this is how we defined boarded up windows, broken windows, inhabited vehicles, graffiti, tents, and mid to large scale debris. We went back and forth of like, what does it really mean when we say boarded up windows? Because some have preventative boarded up windows, some just have plywood on it. And then we also had to go through of like, when we're looking at graffiti, like how are we defining it? So we went through in this first phase and went and defined what we are looking at and how we're counting it. Next slide. So this is what October ended up being. So we ended up taking all of those maps from walking and creating these maps with the same symbology so you could see slowly over time the pattern. So this was October of 2022. Next slide. This is December. So there is a little bit of a change, and we'll be able to be more definitive because when we're collecting this, we're also very aware that people are moving, things are changing day by day, hour by hour. There was a couple of times when we first started that when Heather went out, there was no tent in a location, but when I went out 3 hours later, there was. So there is room for error, and it's not perfect. But the idea is to get a sort of where is it really happening, especially around boarded up windows and graffiti, which is like the streetscape of how people are perceiving it. Next slide. So we did that for October, November, December, and we realized there's no way that the two of us can continue to do this, and how can we reach out to Revitalize Portland and our partners? So our next step is coming out with a walk/roll data collection pilot program, which uses an app called Survey123. So it will be taking real live to a map instead of us putting it in through paper and then making a map. So it'll give us real-time data, and we are rolling it out as a pilot to organize monthly walk rolls by volunteers to collect at least in a designated day, time, and zone. So we're all collecting data so we can get less error. And it will be based on smaller downtown grids with a minimum of 2 people for safety, which we realized is a big part. Next slide. So our pilot program has 11 zones, and we broke it up into these, and we're hoping to start in the next month. So if you are interested, please reach out. We also have it on our survey of how we did today. This is what it will look like. Yeah, you can go next slide. This is what it kind of looks like, just to understand Survey123. So it would be on whatever smartphone you have, and you would be able to, it takes the date and the time automatically, and then it asks you, like, what are you observing? And we would still be using the same metrics we used for boarded up windows, broken windows, and graffiti. And then you count the observation, and when you start the app, it asks for your location. So while you are collecting data, we get it real time, so we can turn it around quickly. Next slide, please. And this is, I think, we're passing it along, but that is our pilot program. Again, if you are interested, we can get you more information.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Caitlin. So the reason we launched that program, right, Revitalize Portland, we're focused on the 4 main areas: homelessness, public image, economy, housing, and crime and safety. And I think we can all agree that having that real-time data is really going to be catalyst in how we affect and educate the public officials as we move forward. That being said, thank you all for being here. If you'd like to be involved in one of our 4 subcommittees, as I mentioned, or volunteer for the streetscaping, please reach out. You can also scan this QR code. It will give a brief survey of what you thought of today's presentation, and then it also has Jerry's survey and JLL's on there as well. So go ahead and scan that QR code. We'll also follow up if you're not on Revitalize Portland's email list. Please get on there so you can have your updates emailed to you. And one last shout out to Thanks Schnitzer Properties for hosting the event. Also thanks to our member organizations for the constant support. This is a collaborative effort. We really look forward to pushing this further in 2023. Thanks.